Hi, this is Frank Schaefer. And whatever else you think about me or my work or my painting or my writing, I think you'd have to admit that I come from a curiously odd, if not to say weird, background. As someone who was a nepotistic sidekick of an evangelist, founder of the religious right in the 1970s and 80s, I have a perspective on American national life rooted in the beginnings of our most vicious cycle of the culture war that emerged from the fight over legalization of abortion through Roe v. Wade. And since that time, I fled the religious right and became a successful secular novelist and a painter. When I say successful, I mean I sold enough books to make a living. I'm not a household name, although I have had a New York Times bestseller and some other good luck with reviews and translations of my novels like Portofino into many languages, etc., etc., etc. These days, by the way, what I care about most is my 5 grandchildren and my 3 kids. And I've got 3 of those 5 grandchildren living on the same block that I live on, and I do childcare for a 3-year-old all day long, along with my wife, pick up the 9-year-old and the 7-year-old from school, and my life revolves around that next generation in our family, which makes the situation our country's in right now with Donald Trump even more poignant. I don't want to beat around the bush, and I know that we're supposed to all be religiously tolerant and open to anything when it comes packaged as religion. People on the left dance around telling the truth about radical Islam. People on the right don't want to hear anything about Christian denominations and the theocracy movement we have in our country, spearheaded by people like Mike Pence and others, who really would like to create a situation which would look a lot more like The Handmaid's Tale, for those of you who want to watch one of the best shows available right now on Hulu, or just buy the first series on Amazon, and bring our country to a place that would be similar to Saudi Arabia or Iran in our treatment of not just women, but minorities, gays, transgenders, and others. And this is not far-fetched when you understand that Donald Trump would not be president unless it was for the 81% of white evangelicals who voted for him. But that monolithic figure can't be understood unless you understand that within that 81%, his core support of those 30% of people in this country, voting people in this country, who still support Donald Trump, comes from the Pentecostal movement, the people who speak in tongues, who on the fringe of their own movement are snake handlers. Let me just put it this way, the most demented and crazy part of Christian expression. And that movement was given credence and a voice through people like Oral Roberts that I knew personally because I spoke at his college and I knew him and his son, Richard. People like Pat Robertson, I was on his show 7 times along with my father back in the 70s and 80s, and others. What a lot of folks from a secular background don't understand, because people like the New York Times and the Washington Post and NPR have utterly failed to communicate to a wider audience, is that evangelicals are not a monolithic culture. There's a sort of a more respectable wing represented by people like the editors of Christianity Today magazine, a magazine, by the way, that hates my guts, but that's fine. They're more respectable anyway. A kind of a more intellectual spin on their faith, all the way through to these insane Pentecostals who think that Donald Trump has literally been raised up like King Darius in the Bible, who was an evil and unjust person, but was nevertheless used by God, quote unquote, to work wonders for the people of Israel and God's great plan for all of us here on earth. You have to understand then that rational argument will never chip away at his poll numbers with these folks, because they have accepted it as a theological truth that he's meant to be president. So there's whole Pentecostal organizations run by mostly flakes who are just into the fundraising, talk show hosts, sort of the next generation after Pat Robertson, who are raising money on prayer circles to uphold this president against the fake news attacks of the liberal media and so forth. But what you don't get if you read the New York Times or Washington Post or listen to NPR is the inner dynamic of just how off the wall these people are. The secular media dances around really telling the story about the Pentecostal movement in the same way that a lot of liberals dance around really telling the story about what happens to women in Saudi Arabia, Iran, and other places, that it isn't just radicalized Islam, but that Islam as a religion has a woman problem. And there's no use ducking it. You cannot be a feminist, you cannot be pro-gay, you cannot be about civil rights or human rights and think that this is not a problem. Well, similarly, here in America, you cannot be honest and not understand that Pentecostal Christianity, as it now has emerged, is a mixture of right-wing nationalism combined with a religious insanity which you don't find anywhere outside of Iran or the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia. And that if this is what Christianity was, and this will be a controversial statement, then the Chinese Communist Party has a lot of common sense in trying to suppress it, because these folks are deranged. Literally, their brains have flipped. They think that Jesus can't come back again until there's a theocracy on earth, a sort of a just culture of American exceptionalism lifted to another level, where all of a sudden, literally, we are in the territory of the Handmaid's Tale. That maybe that novel and the TV series, and wow, Elizabeth Moss, isn't she just fabulous if you've seen her? She's just the most watchable, brilliant actress, heart-stoppingly beautiful artistry in her work, even though it's a tough series to watch. That parentheses aside, when you look at the direction of people like Mike Pence and what they want to do to our country, they just see Donald Trump as a stepping stone to bringing about heaven on earth in exactly the same way ISIS and Al-Qaeda and all these other organizations have thought of religion as well. We have our own ISIS and Al-Qaeda here in America, and it's headed by people like Mike Pence, who is a theocrat, who would do to gay people and do to women what happens in Handmaid's Tale if he could get away with it. Trust me, this is true. And it is about time the New York Times and the Washington Post and others begin to get away from this East Coast snobbery when it comes to looking honestly at religion and really unpack who these theocrats are who in their derangement, in their flight from reality, back Donald Trump because of some weird eschatology of the return of Christ being predicated upon the state of Israel being intact on one hand, and here in America, American exceptionalism and theocracy carried to a level that we wouldn't have seen since the Salem witch trials. That's what these people want. That's why Donald Trump still has anybody left polling support for him. Again, it's about their theology. Facts have nothing to do with it. These same people believe in a literal Bible. They believe in Noah's Ark, but not in climate change. And if they had their own way, gays would be dragged from their homes and stoned to death. And women would be not just sent back into the kitchen, but women would be also punished with prison sentences for having an abortion, whatever it may be. That is the core of the white evangelical movement that will support Donald Trump to the end. And that does not, as I said again, represent all evangelicals, but it represents the core of the core of the core. And the secular media better get off its fat butt, its self-satisfied, inward-looking East Coast, West Coast butt, and begin to unpack the truth about this religious insanity that is gripping our country through this false idiot Donald Trump, who could care less about these Christians, but needs their core value support. Thank you. My name is Frank Schaefer.